You thought awakening would set you free. You thought once your eyes were opened, life would become crystal clear, passion would pour into your veins, and every day would feel like a higher calling. But instead, you woke up and felt nothing. The goals that once lit a fire in you now feel pointless. The dreams you sacrificed for no longer pull you forward. You're not lazy, and you're not broken. You've simply outgrown the fuel that once drove you. And if you don't understand why this is happening, you'll mistake this quiet stage for failure, when in reality, it's the doorway to a deeper kind of purpose than you've ever known. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share will explain why you feel this way, and how to reignite your drive in a way that can never be taken from you again. There's something almost cruel about the way spiritual awakening works. You expect it to be the climax of your life's journey, the moment where everything falls into place, where you finally feel unstoppable, unshakable, and filled with passion for life. You imagine walking through the world with laser focus, purpose dripping from every action, a deep certainty in your heart that you are exactly where you're supposed to be. And then it happens. The illusions break. The lies you've been told by society, by your conditioning, by your own ego fall away. You see life for what it really is. And it's beautiful in its truth, but also raw, empty, and strangely still. That's when the paradox sets in. Instead of feeling more alive than ever, you find yourself feeling numb. The rush of ambition, the hunger for goals, the restless energy that used to push you forward is gone. It's as if someone turned off the engine inside you. This is the paradox of awakening. You gain clarity, but you lose drive. You understand reality more deeply, yet you feel less motivated to engage with it. The desires that once fueled your every move now feel shallow, artificial, and meaningless. The job title you once craved no longer excites you. The material possessions you once chased feel like empty trophies. Even relationships that used to consume your thoughts feel lighter, less gripping, as though you've stepped outside of them and can't find a way back in. This isn't depression, although it can feel similar. Depression is when you want to feel something but can't. This is different. You're not trying to feel something. You're simply watching, observing life instead of participating in it. And this is where most people start to panic. They think, something is wrong with me. I'm supposed to be enlightened. But I can't even get out of bed with excitement anymore. What's the point of living if nothing drives me? They start to feel like they've lost themselves. But the truth is, they have lost themselves, or at least the version of themselves that existed before the awakening. The one who was fueled by constant striving, by comparison, by the need to prove something. That self is gone, and with it, the motivation that was built on those foundations. The danger here is that without understanding this transition, people often fall into stagnation. They mistake the quiet for a permanent state. They think that since the old fire is gone, there's no point in doing anything. They convince themselves that action is meaningless now that they see the illusions behind the world's games. And so they stop. They sit. They wait for the universe to send them a lightning bolt of purpose. But that's not how this works. Spiritual awakening is not the end of the journey. It's not the finish line where you get to retire from effort and just exist in bliss forever. It's the moment when you're given a blank page and told, no, write your life consciously. Before awakening, most people run on borrowed energy. Society hands them a checklist: career, money, status, family, possessions, and says, this is what matters. And without questioning it, they chase those things, thinking they are chasing their own dreams. The competition, the desire to fit in, the fear of being left behind, all of it creates a powerful current of motivation. But it's not real. It's not coming from within. It's coming from fear and conditioning. When you awaken, that current stops. The water becomes still, and if you've been depending on that current to move you, you suddenly feel stranded. This is why awakening can feel like a loss. You lose your false self, but you also lose the energy that self-generated. It's like taking the fuel out of a car. It doesn't matter how good the engine is, it won't run until you find a new source of power. The problem is, your old fuel was toxic. It burned bright, but it was destroying you. Now, you have to find clean fuel. That's the real work after awakening. It's not just about seeing the truth. It's about learning to live from it. The paradox is that this stage is both the most liberating and the most dangerous part of the journey. Liberating because you are no longer chained to the illusions that once drove you. Dangerous because without new motivation, you can drift into apathy, and apathy is a slow death. The universe didn't bring you to this point so you could stop growing. It brought you here so you could grow in a new way. One that is not about ego survival, but about conscious creation. You have to understand that awakening dismantles the old structures, but it doesn't automatically build the new one. Think of it like demolishing a building that was unsafe and badly designed. You tear it down, and for a while, you're left with rubble and an empty lot. It's tempting to stand there, staring at the emptiness, thinking, well, at least I'm not trapped in that old building anymore. But the real challenge is to design and construct something new, something that aligns with your deeper truth. The problem is, most people aren't prepared for how disorienting this can be. You've been told all your life that motivation comes from having big goals, but after awakening, big goals don't excite you unless they're rooted in something real. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Finding what's real for you takes time. There's no quick fix. You can't rush it. You have to be willing to sit in the uncertainty, to keep moving even when you don't have the same emotional rush you used to rely on. This is the part that separates those who integrate their awakening from those who waste it. Integration means bringing your awareness back into action. It means learning to operate in the world without being consumed by it. It means doing things not because they will make you look successful, but because they are in alignment with the person you are becoming. And here's the paradox again. The less you care about impressing others, the harder it can be to start doing anything. That's why discipline becomes essential after awakening. Motivation may come, but discipline is what allows you to rebuild your life with intention. The human mind loves certainty. Before awakening, you had a clear script, even if it wasn't truly yours. After awakening, the script is gone. You're holding a blank page, and the responsibility to write it yourself can feel overwhelming. That's why so many people stall here. They think they're just waiting for the right time. But in reality, they're avoiding the discomfort of starting from scratch. You have to be willing to create without knowing the outcome. You have to move without waiting to feel the old rush of excitement. And this is where a lot of people misunderstand motivation. They think it's something that appears before action. But in truth, after awakening, motivation is something that's generated by action. The more you move, the more clarity you get. The more clarity you get, the more your actions feel aligned, and when your actions feel aligned, a new kind of motivation starts to grow. One that is quieter but far more powerful than the old one. The paradox of awakening is that it takes away your false fuel so you can find the real thing. But finding it requires you to keep moving even when it feels like you're running on empty. It's like your soul is testing you. Will you keep going even without the old rewards? Will you live your truth even if no one is watching? Will you act from love instead of fear? If you can answer yes to those questions, You'll step into a level of power that no setback can touch. Awakening strips you bare. It forces you to meet yourself without distractions, without the crutches you've leaned on your whole life. And in that exposed state, you get to choose what to build next. That choice is the most important one you will ever make, because the motivation you create now will not just carry you through your goals. It will carry you through your life. When you go through a spiritual awakening, something profound happens beneath the surface. The old desires that once controlled your life begin to dissolve. These weren't just wants or preferences. They were the very pillars of your identity. The things you used to chase gave you direction. They made you feel alive. They gave you something to wake up for. Whether it was climbing the corporate ladder, buying the dream car, earning the respect of a certain circle, or living a lifestyle that looked good from the outside, those desires served as the fuel for almost every decision you made. And then, without warning, after awakening, they lose their grip on you. The dreams you once obsessed over no longer make your heart race. The goals you once swore you'd do anything to achieve suddenly feel hollow, almost like you've woken up from a dream where you were running in circles for no reason at all. This isn't laziness, and it's not a loss of ambition. It's a shedding of illusions. Spiritual awakening strips away the false promises you were sold. The belief that achieving certain milestones would complete you, that collecting enough external validation would silence the inner void, that if you just worked hard enough, earned enough, and looked successful enough, you would finally feel whole. When that veil is lifted, you can no longer be tricked by the same carrots dangling in front of you. And that's a good thing, but it can also leave you feeling disoriented. Because for years, those carrots were all you knew. You might find yourself standing in the same life you built with those old desires. But it feels foreign now. The house you dreamed of owning feels like just a structure. The job title that once gave you pride feels like just a label. The relationships you entered into for status, security, or comfort now feel like a mirror reflecting parts of yourself you no longer recognize. You can't go back to being who you were before, but you're not yet sure who you are becoming. This in-between stage is uncomfortable because you've lost your why, and without it, even the simplest actions can feel heavy. The death of old desires is not the death of life itself. It is the clearing of space. Think about it. If you're holding on to something with both hands, you have no room to grab onto something new. Awakening pries those hands open, often in ways that feel forceful, and in the moment, you may want to cling to the old just because it's familiar. But what you're being given is a chance to build a life that isn't driven by fear of missing out or fear of not being enough. The truth is, most of your old desires were never really yours. They were implanted. From the time you were young, you were told what to want. It was woven into your education, your culture, your social circles, and even your entertainment. You were handed a vision of success and happiness that looked shiny on the surface, but was designed to keep you endlessly chasing. That vision didn't care about your soul, your peace, or your authentic self. It cared about keeping you in the game, and awakening is when you finally realize you don't have to play by those rules anymore. But here's where the danger lies. When those old desires die, if you're not careful, you can fall into a void where nothing feels worth pursuing. You've learned to see through the lies, but you haven't yet discovered the deeper truth that will guide your next chapter. This is why so many awakened people go through what feels like a slump or a prolonged state of detachment. They tell themselves, none of it matters, why bother doing anything? They convince themselves they're just being enlightened by avoiding ambition, when in reality, they're avoiding the discomfort of redefining ambition in a way that aligns with their new values. It's important to understand that the end of your old desires is not the end of desire itself. Desire is a natural part of the human experience. Without it, there is no growth, no creation, no contribution. The problem is not desire, it's unconscious desire. When your desires are unconscious, they control you. When they are conscious, you control them. The goal after awakening is not to eliminate all desire, but to rebuild it in a way that serves your higher purpose rather than your ego's cravings. This is where a shift has to happen. Before awakening, your desires were about getting recognition, getting wealth, getting power, getting validation. After awakening, your desires must become about giving. Giving your energy to what matters, giving your skills to something that benefits more than just you, giving your life to a purpose that would still be worth living even if no one applauded you for it. This shift is uncomfortable because the world doesn't celebrate giving the same way it celebrates getting. You won't get the same dopamine rush, the same public approval, or the same social rewards. But you will get something deeper, a quiet satisfaction that cannot be bought or taken away. The death of old desires forces you to ask hard questions. Who am I without the things I used to chase? If I remove all the goals that were built on ego, what is left? If I never had to prove anything to anyone, what would I choose to do with my time? These questions can feel destabilizing because they strip you down to the core. But in that raw state, you can start to build from truth instead of. You must be willing to let go of the high that came from chasing things that were never meant for you. That high was addictive because it kept you distracted from your deeper dissatisfaction. When you give it up, there will be a withdrawal period. You will feel restless. You will feel like nothing excites you the way it used to. That's not because life has lost its magic. It's because you're adjusting to a different frequency, one that doesn't come from chasing quick hits of achievement, but from aligning with something that feels right at the deepest level of your being. This is where discipline becomes more important than ever. When your old desires die, you can't wait for passion to wake you up in the morning. You have to wake yourself up, knowing that the new passion will only come through consistent action. You must show up for your life, even when you don't feel the rush you used to rely on. Over time, this new way of living creates its own kind of fire, one that is steady, sustainable, and grounded in reality instead of fantasy. And it's worth mentioning that some people mistake the death of old desires for a sign that they should isolate themselves completely, withdrawing from society as if detachment is the ultimate goal. But life is not meant to be escaped. It's meant to be lived with your eyes open. The point of awakening is not to separate yourself from the world, but to interact with it differently. To contribute without being consumed, to act without being attached, to create without being controlled by the need for approval. There's also a deeper truth here. When your old desires die, you're being given a test. Can you move forward without the applause, without the adrenaline, without the external rewards that used to pull you along? Can you work for something that no one else understands, simply because it feels true to you? This is what maturity in the spiritual journey looks like. It's not about rejecting desire. It's about refining it. You'll know you're moving in the right direction when the things you start wanting are less about possession and more about expression, less about proving something and more about living something. You'll know you're growing when you stop asking, "What can I get out of this?" and start asking, "What can I give to this?" That shift doesn't happen overnight. It's built slowly, through choices that may feel small in the moment, but transform you over time. And here's the beauty of it. Once you've rebuilt your desires from a place of truth, They will be far more powerful than the ones you lost, because they won't be fragile. They won't collapse the moment someone criticizes you, or the moment you hit an obstacle. They will be rooted in something unshakable, something that no one else can give you, and no one else can take away. That is the reward for letting the old ones die. The birth of new ones that actually belong to you. One of the most deceptive traps that keeps people stuck before and even after spiritual awakening is the belief in a final destination. It's that quiet promise in the back of your mind that tells you if you just do enough, work enough, and become enough, you'll eventually arrive at a place where everything is perfect, complete, and effortless. Before awakening, this destination is usually disguised as a material goal, a certain income, a dream home, a relationship that feels like the missing piece, a lifestyle that erases all your worries. After awakening, the shape of the destination might change, but the illusion often remains. Instead of chasing money or status, you might now be chasing perfect peace, constant joy, or a perpetual state of higher consciousness, believing that one day you'll arrive and stay there forever. The problem with this belief is that it freezes you into a waiting game. You start postponing your sense of fulfillment until you've reached some imagined finish line. You tell yourself that when you get there, you'll finally live without worry, without struggle, without doubt. You'll finally be the person you always wanted to be, and life will flow without resistance. But the truth is, there is no such place. There is no final destination where the work stops and the journey is over. Life doesn't operate like a ladder where you climb high enough and then stay there in peace. It moves like a river, always flowing, always changing, always carrying you into new territories whether you're ready or not. Before awakening, this illusion is fueled by the external world. You're told that happiness lies at the top of certain mountains. The mountain of success, the mountain of beauty, the mountain of influence. The moment you reach one summit, you realize there's another just beyond it. You might have thought the promotion would bring lasting satisfaction, but it only made you hungry for the next one. You might have thought owning the dream car would feel like a forever victory, but the shine wore off faster than you expected. This is the treadmill effect. You keep running, but the scenery doesn't change the way you imagined. After awakening, the illusion shifts to something that feels more noble, but can be just as toxic. Instead of chasing career titles or possessions, you start chasing states of being. You believe that once you meditate enough, heal enough, read enough, and clear enough karma, you'll enter a permanent state of bliss where nothing ever bothers you again. And because it's framed in spiritual language, it can be harder to see it for the trap that it is. You think you're seeking enlightenment, but you might just be seeking another version of the same illusion. The belief that happiness is somewhere other than here. The danger of this mindset is that it disconnects you from the present moment. You start treating today like a stepping stone to some future day that's more valuable. You stop fully living in your current chapter because you're always trying to get to the next one. You unconsciously devalue your own life as it's happening because it doesn't match the mental image of your final arrival. This is why so many people feel an emptiness after spiritual awakening. They've dismantled their old goals, but they've replaced them with another unreachable ideal. One of the hardest truths to accept is that there is no permanent state in life. Growth is continuous. Healing is continuous. Learning is continuous. You might have breakthroughs, moments of clarity, periods of deep peace, but they will eddy and flow. Not because you're failing, but because you're alive. You are meant to experience seasons. There will be moments when you feel completely in alignment, and moments when you feel like you're walking through fog. Both are part of the path. Think of it like hiking. You might imagine that reaching the peak is the whole point, but the truth is, the trail doesn't end there. Once you've taken in the view, you have to keep moving. Sometimes down into valleys, sometimes of false ridges, sometimes through rough terrain. The peak was never the end. It was just one point in the journey. If you cling to it as the destination, you'll miss the beauty of everything else along the way. This doesn't mean you shouldn't have goals or visions for your life. It means you must hold them lightly. They are there to give you direction, not to imprison your joy. The purpose of a goal is to inspire your movement, not to define your worth. When you fall into the final destination, you attach your worth and happiness to a moment in the future, and you rob yourself of the ability to feel complete now. It's tempting to think that the awakened path should be about getting to a place where nothing shakes you. But in reality, awakening is about learning to walk through life with open eyes, open hands, and an open heart. Even when the ground beneath you shifts, it's about being able to experience joy and sorrow without clinging to one or resisting the other. That balance is not a destination you arrive at and keep forever. It's a skill you practice daily. One reason the illusion is so persistent is that the human mind is wired to crave certainty. It feels safer to believe that there's a finish line where you can finally relax. The thought of a never-ending journey can feel exhausting, but that's only because we're conditioned to see life as something to conquer rather than something to experience. If you think life is about winning, then yes, a journey without an end sounds like torture. But if you see life as an unfolding exploration, then the absence of a final destination becomes a gift. It means there is always more to discover, more to create, more to become. Many people resist this because they confuse acceptance with giving up. They think, if I stop chasing the final destination, won't I lose all my motivation? But letting go of the illusion doesn't kill your drive. It frees it. When you're no longer weighed down by the pressure to arrive, you can actually pour yourself into the present moment with more energy and focus. You're not distracted by comparing where you are to where you think you should be. You're fully here, and that's when real transformation happens. It's also worth noting that the final destination mindset is one of the biggest sources of suffering. It makes you constantly feel behind, no matter what you've achieved. It breeds impatience, self-criticism, and burnout. It whispers that you're never enough until you get there, which means you can never truly rest in your own life. Awakening is supposed to free you from that kind of self-imposed prison, not replace it with a prettier one. The truth is, your life is not a straight line from point A to point B. It's a spiral. You will revisit it. You will meet old challenges in new ways. You will circle back to truths you thought you understood, only to see them from a richer perspective. And this is not failure, it's evolution. If you expect life to be a straight climb to the top, every loop will feel like going backward. But if you understand the spiral, you'll see that you're always moving, even when it looks like you're covering the same ground. When you let go of the idea of a final destination, you begin to measure your life differently. Instead of asking, how close am I to arriving? You ask, how deeply am I living today? Instead of chasing a permanent state, you focus on practicing that matter to you. Kindness, presence, courage, creativity. No matter what chapter you're in, the more you live this way, the less you'll crave the illusion of a perfect future, because you'll see that the depth of your life is determined by how you engage with it right now. And perhaps the most liberating shift is realizing that you don't have to be done to be whole. You don't have to have it all figured out to be worthy of love. respect, and joy. You don't have to wait for some grand moment to feel like your life matters. The meaning is not waiting for you at the end. It's being created in every small, intentional choice you make along the way. There is a strange and often uncomfortable space that many people find themselves in after a spiritual awakening. It is not the beginning, when you were fully identified with your old self and old life, and it is not the fully integrated phase where you've embodied your new understanding in a grounded way. It's the middle, the in-between. You've stepped out of the person you used to be, but you haven't fully stepped into the person you're becoming. This space can feel like a void, a limbo, an endless hallway with no visible door at the end. It's not talked about enough, yet it's one of the most crucial phases of transformation. The void is unsettling because your old motivations have dissolved, but your new motivations haven't yet rooted themselves deeply enough to guide you forward. You no longer resonate with the habits, ambitions, and identities that once drove you, but you also haven't fully discovered what will replace them. It can feel like losing your inner compass. You wake up without that familiar sense of urgency, but without a clear sense of direction either. It's as if you've let go of one trapeze bar and are suspended in mid-air, waiting for the next one to swing close enough to grab. Most people are conditioned to avoid this kind of space at all costs. We're taught to fill every gap, to replace every loss immediately, to rush from one identity to the next without lingering in the unknown. Our culture worships certainty and progress, and the void offers neither. This makes it easy to label the void as failure or regression when, in reality, it's a natural and necessary part of growth. When you awaken to a deeper understanding of yourself and life, there has to be a shedding process. Parts of you that were built on illusions, on fear, on old conditioning have to fall away, and that creates emptiness before it creates renewal. In this space, it's common to feel restless. The mind wants to latch onto something familiar, even if it's not truly aligned anymore. You might catch yourself thinking about going back to old goals or old versions of yourself simply because the unknown feels too uncomfortable. You might even try to recreate old sources of motivation, but they don't work the way they used to. What once lit a fire now barely sparks a flame, because deep down you know those things no longer match the person you are becoming. This is where many people misinterpret their experience. They think, I've lost my drive, I've lost my purpose, I'm stuck. They try to force themselves into action, to fix their lack of motivation, when what they really need is to understand that the void is not an error, it's a recalibration. Your inner operating system is being rewritten, and in that process, there's naturally a pause between deleting old programs and installing new ones. If you rush to fill that pause with anything just to feel certain again, you risk pulling yourself back into old patterns. The void demands a different kind of courage than most people are used to. It's not the courage to fight or to win, but the courage to be still and let the unknown do its work. It's the courage to face days where you don't have the answers, to sit with the discomfort of not knowing what's next, and to trust that clarity will emerge in its own time. This is where trust stops being a pretty word and starts becoming a lived practice. There's a hidden beauty in this stage, if you can learn to see it. In the void, you are free from the noise of the old self, yet you are not yet bound by the commitments of the new self. You are in a rare, open space where you can explore without pressure, experiment without the weight of an identity to defend. You can ask questions without needing immediate answers. Who am I now? What truly matters to me? What do I want to create with this one life I have? The void gives you the opportunity to rebuild your motivations from a place of truth rather than habit. The most powerful shifts happen in these quiet, uncertain spaces because you're no longer operating on autopilot. Every choice you make is conscious because nothing feels automatic anymore. It can be disorienting, yes, but it's also fertile ground for transformation. Seeds need empty soil to take root. If the soil is still cluttered with the remains of old plants, nothing new can grow. The void clears the field. There's also an important lesson here about identity. Before awakening, your sense of self was often tied to your roles, your achievements, your possessions, and your relationships. After awakening, much of that is stripped away, and you realize you are not any of those things. But this realization is not always liberating at first. It can feel like standing naked in front of life with nothing to hide behind. The void forces you to confront who you are without the scaffolding of external validation. And that confrontation, though uncomfortable, is the birthplace of unshakable authenticity. People often ask, how long will the void last? The honest answer is, it lasts as long as it needs to. For some, it's weeks or months. For others, it's years. It's not about how much time passes, but about how deeply you allow yourself to surrender to the process. The more you resist, the longer it feels. The more you lean in, the more naturally the next chapter unfolds. This isn't to say you should be passive. The void is not about doing nothing. It's about doing the right kind of work, the inner work of listening, reflecting, clearing, and aligning. During this phase, it's essential to shift how you measure progress. You can no longer measure it by external milestones or checklists. Progress here looks like greater self-awareness, deeper honesty with yourself, more peace with uncertainty. It might not be glamorous, and it might not look impressive from the outside, but it's the kind of progress that sets the foundation for everything that comes next. You may also find that the void tests your relationship. Without the distractions of constant busyness, you are left with your own thoughts, feelings, and patterns. Old wounds may surface. Fears you've avoided may demand your attention. This is where self-compassion becomes not just helpful, but vital. You cannot bully yourself out of the void. You can only walk through it with patience and understanding, the way you would guide a friend through an unfamiliar landscape. One of the most empowering realizations you can have in this stage is that the void is not empty in the way you think. On the surface, it may look like nothing is happening, but beneath the surface, deep restructuring is taking place. Your priorities are shifting. Your values are crystallizing. Your vision for your life is being refined. Just as a caterpillar dissolves into formlessness inside the cocoon before emerging as a butterfly, you are undergoing a breakdown of the old structure to make way for something entirely new. If you can accept that the void is part of the path, you stop fighting it. And when you stop fighting it, you start to notice its gifts. You begin to see that it is teaching you patience, teaching you trust, teaching you to find peace without clinging to control. It is giving you space to imagine new possibilities with the weight of your old limitations. It is showing you that your value is not dependent on constant motion, that your worth is not tied to delay, and that your life has meaning even in the pauses. Many people look back on their time in the void and realize it was one of the most transformative periods of their lives. Not because it was easy, but because it stripped them down to what was essential. When everything familiar was gone, they were forced to find a deeper source of motivation, one that didn't rely on external rewards or recognition. That kind of motivation, once discovered, becomes unshakable because it's rooted in who you are, not in what you do. This stage is also where you learn the difference between seeking and receiving. Before awakening, you might have chased answers relentlessly, thinking that if you looked hard enough, you could force clarity to arrive. In the void, you realize that some answers can only be received in their own time. You can prepare yourself to recognize them when they come, but you cannot drag them into existence. This is a humbling lesson, but it's also deeply freeing, because it teaches you that you don't have to control the entire unfolding of your life. You only have to show up with presence and openness each day. One of the most disorienting changes that happens after a spiritual awakening is the sudden collapse of the old reward system that used to drive your behavior. Before, the approval of others felt like oxygen. Compliments, promotions, likes, followers, admiration, they all provided a rush, a sense that you were doing something right. You didn't just want these things, you built your identity around them. You became skilled at reading what others wanted from you and delivering it in exchange for their praise. But after awakening, something shifts so profoundly that the applause no longer feeds you. The dopamine hit you used to get from being acknowledged starts to fade, and the silence that replaces it can feel like an unexpected void. This is because awakening dissolves the illusion that your value is determined by the opinions of other people. You begin to see how much of your life was spent performing for an audience, even if you didn't realize you were doing it. The clothes you wore, the way you spoke, the jobs you took, the goals you pursued. Much of it was shaped by an invisible contract you had with the world. If I give you what you want, you will tell me I matter. When that contract gets ripped up, without their applause, do I still matter? And the answer, if you stay with the discomfort long enough, is yes, but in a way that has nothing to do with them. At first, though, losing external validation can feel like losing your sense of purpose. Your old motivations were intertwined with recognition. You studied harder, worked longer, trained relentlessly, often because you wanted someone to notice and approve. Even your acts of kindness, generosity, or creativity might have been partially fueled by the desire to be seen as good, talented, or worthy. Once that craving for recognition fades, the question arises, if no one is watching, will I still do this? If there's no audience to clap, will I still put in the work? This is where many people experience a deep drop in motivation. They mistake the absence of external rewards for the absence of purpose. But what's actually happening is a detox. You are being weaned off an addictive cycle of approval, seeking so that you can discover a more sustainable and authentic source of drive. It's not that you don't care about your life anymore. It's that you're no longer willing to run on borrowed fuel. The challenge is, while your new internal fuel source is being built, there's often a gap where you feel tired, directionless, or unmotivated. This gap is where the real work begins. It requires you to ask yourself questions that most people avoid their entire lives. If I take away the promise of applause, what remains? What do I truly care about, regardless of whether anyone notices? What am I willing to commit to purely because it matters to me, not because it will impress others? These questions are uncomfortable because they strip away all the superficial rewards and leave you with the raw truth of your values. And if your old values were mostly shaped by other people's expectations, you may find yourself staring at a blank canvas. A blank canvas can feel like both freedom and terror. On one hand, it means you can rebuild your motivations from the ground up. On the other, it means you can't hide behind the familiar structures that used to guide you. No more chasing titles because your parents will be proud. No more posting achievements online because strangers will admire you. No more saying yes to things you don't believe in just to avoid judgment. Instead, you have to generate your own reasons for action. This is a radical shift, and it doesn't happen overnight. We are wired from childhood to seek approval from authority figures, peers, and society at large. It starts as a survival mechanism, As children, we depend on the care and acceptance of adults to meet our needs, so we learn to mold ourselves to please them. As we grow, that conditioning becomes a habit, and we confuse approval with love, attention with worth. A spiritual awakening shatters that illusion by showing you that real love and real worth do not depend on anyone else's opinion. But knowing this intellectually and embodying it emotionally are two very different stages of the journey. During this stage, you may notice the subtle ways you still try to get approval even after recognizing the trap. Maybe you share your new spiritual insights, secretly hoping others will validate your growth. Maybe you pursue a creative project, telling yourself it's just for you. But you still check how many people like it or compliment it. This is not something to shame yourself for. It's a natural part of the transition. But the more aware you become of these patterns, the more you can shift your attention inward. The goal is to anchor your actions in intrinsic motivation. The kind that comes from doing something because it's aligned with your values, it brings you joy, or it fulfills your sense of purpose, regardless of external response. Intrinsic motivation is what allows an artist to keep painting even if their work never sells, what drives a scientist to keep researching even if no one notices, what inspires a healer to keep helping even if they receive no thanks. It is pure because it's not conditional on recognition. One of the most powerful ways to build intrinsic motivation is to reconnect with curiosity. Before life became a performance, you did things simply because you wanted to explore. As a child, you didn't draw a picture so it could be framed in a gallery. You drew because the colors fascinated you. You didn't climb a tree so someone would clap. You climbed because you wanted to see the view. Spiritual awakening invites you back to that place, where the act itself is the reward. This doesn't mean you'll never care about results, or that you'll be free from wanting to be seen. It means those desires no longer run the show. They become secondary to the deeper satisfaction of living in alignment with who you are. And here's the paradox. When you stop chasing external validation and focus on what's true for you, your work often becomes more impactful and more appreciated. Not because you tried to make it that way, but because authenticity is magnetic. There's another layer to this transformation that's worth mentioning: the emotional detox that comes from losing external validation. When you stop relying on others to tell you you're enough, all the moments you didn't feel enough in the past come rushing to the surface. Old insecurities, buried shame, childhood wounds. They can all rise up when the steady drip of approval is gone. This can feel like regression, but it's actually an opportunity for deep healing. Without the numbing effect of constant praise, you can finally face and process these unresolved emotions. This healing process may involve forgiving yourself for all the times you betrayed your own truth to please others. It may involve grieving the years you spent chasing validation instead of living authentically. It may even involve confronting the fear that without approval, you will be invisible or forgotten. Sitting with these fears is part of the work. They lose their power when you stop running from them and start meeting them with compassion. There's also a practical side to this stage. When you no longer seek external validation, your decision-making process changes. You stop asking, "What will they think?" and start asking, "What feels right?" You stop making choices based on how they will look and start making them based on how they will feel. This shift can lead you to take risks that the old you would have avoided. It can also lead you to walk away from situations that once seemed like successes because they no longer align with your deeper values. This is where you begin to experience a quieter kind of motivation, one that's steady rather than frantic. It's the difference between sprinting toward a finish line because you want the crowd to cheer and walking a path because you love the view. The first is exhausting and dependent on external circumstances. The second is sustainable because it's rooted in your own inner compass. The truth is, external validation is never truly stable. People's opinions are fickle, trends change, applause fades. If your motivation depends on those things, you will always be on shaky ground. Awakening takes away that shaky ground so you can build on something solid. The unwavering truth of who you are and what matters to you. That truth doesn't need to be announced or applauded to be real. It exists whether anyone sees it or not. And this is where the deeper power begins to emerge. When you no longer need people to approve of you, you become free to take actions that might even disappoint or confuse them. If those actions are aligned with your truth, you stop being controlled by the fear of judgment, which means you can do what's necessary for your growth without hesitation. This is the freedom that so many seek but so few find, because it requires letting go of one of the most addictive forces in human life, the need to be liked. In this space, your energy shifts from performing for others to creating from your essence. You're no longer editing yourself to fit into what's acceptable or impressive. You speak when you have something to say, not because you're afraid of being forgotten. You act when it's aligned, not because you're chasing approval. You become someone who can walk into a room and feel whole whether or not anyone acknowledges you. And there's a deep peace in that, the kind of peace that can't be bought with likes, awards, or applause. The kind of peace that says, I am enough, even in silence. It doesn't mean you never appreciate recognition when it comes. You can still welcome it with gratitude. But it's no longer the reason you get out of bed in the morning. Your reason now comes from a deeper place, a place that can't be taken away. There comes a moment after a spiritual awakening when you start to notice that the people around you don't seem to match you anymore. Conversations that once felt effortless now feel forced. Jokes that once made you laugh now sound. The gatherings you used to look forward to suddenly feel like you're watching life from behind a glass wall. It's not that you've become better than anyone. It's that your frequency, your values, your priorities have shifted, and the bonds that were built on the old version of you can't always survive the new one. When this shift begins, it can be confusing and deeply emotional. The mind wants to believe that love and friendship will automatically withstand any inner growth. But the truth is, many relationships are not built for the long road. Some are meant to accompany you only through certain seasons of life. And when you awaken, you often realize that much of your old social world was constructed around shared illusions, shared coping mechanisms, shared insecurities, shared unspoken agreements to avoid certain truths. When those illusions dissolve for you, the connection points dissolve with them. What makes this especially challenging is that the collapse of old relationships doesn't usually happen in one dramatic moment. More often, it's a slow drifting apart. You notice you don't feel as compelled to text back immediately. You cancel plans without the old guilt. You stop pretending to enjoy the same topics or the same forms of entertainment. The people who once seemed like your inner circle start to feel like strangers you happen to have memories with. And as the gap grows, the silence between you starts to speak louder than the words you use to exchange. This isn't just about friends or acquaintances. It can happen with family, with partners, with colleagues. And when it happens with those closest to you, it can feel like the ground is being pulled out from under your feet, because relationships aren't just emotional bonds, they're also anchors that give us a sense of identity. If you've been someone's best friend for 10 years, their presence has been part of how you define yourself. If you've been part of a family dynamic for decades, those roles have shaped your sense of self. So when those bonds shift or break, it can feel like you're losing a part of who you are. The truth is, you are losing a part of who you were. And that's exactly what makes room for who you're becoming. But knowing this doesn't make the process painless. You may feel grief that catches you off guard, even for relationships you know are no longer healthy. You may feel waves of loneliness, even if you've chosen to step back. You may even feel guilt, as if you've abandoned people simply by changing. The mind will try to convince you that you should shrink yourself back to fit the old version they know, just to keep the peace. But shrinking never truly keeps the peace. It only delays the inevitable fracture, and it does so at the cost of your authenticity. There is a temptation in this stage to try to bring people with you. You want to share everything you've learned, everything you've felt, in the hope that they'll understand and grow alongside you. Sometimes this works. There are rare and beautiful moments when someone meets your transformation with openness and curiosity, and you evolve together. But more often, people resist the changes in you because it forces them to confront the possibility of change in themselves. Your growth can act like a mirror, reflecting back the places where they've stayed comfortable, and not everyone is ready to face that reflection. This is not a judgment of them. It's simply the nature of human growth. People awaken at their own pace, and some may not awaken at all in this lifetime. Your job is not to drag them forward, but to walk your own path with integrity. This may mean letting certain relationships fade without forcing closure. It may mean accepting that someone you love deeply cannot meet you where you are right now. It may mean allowing space, without anger, for them to continue their journey in the way that's right for them, even if it's far from your own. One of the most liberating realizations during this stage is that love does not always require proximity. You can love someone from a distance. You can hold gratitude for the role they played in your life without needing to keep them in your daily orbit. You can honor the history you shared without forcing a future that no longer fits. This kind of love is quieter, gentler, and far more sustainable because it's not based on control or conformity. It's based on acceptance. At the same time, the collapse of old relationships creates space for new ones. At first, the empty space may feel uncomfortable, like an echo chamber. But over time, it becomes fertile ground for connections that are more aligned with who you are now. These new relationships often form more slowly because they're not built on convenience or familiarity. They're built on resonance. You're no longer seeking people to fill a void. You're inviting people to share the fullness you've cultivated within yourself. When these new connections arrive, you'll notice a different quality to them. There's less pretense, less performance, less need to prove yourself. You're able to show up as you are, and they meet you there without trying to mold you into something else. These relationships don't drain you, they nourish you. And you don't cling to them out of fear, because you've learned that your worth isn't dependent on whether someone stays. Yet the journey through this stage isn't just about losing and gaining people. It's about redefining what connection means to you. Before awakening, you may have measured connection by frequency of contact, by how often someone agreed with you, or by whether they were there for you in times of crisis. After awakening, connection becomes about truth. Can you be yourself with this person without editing or hiding? Can they hold space for your authenticity without trying to control it? Can you disagree without the bond breaking? Can you grow without fear that the growth will push them away? This shift can also bring up an important lesson in boundaries. When you no longer feel the need to maintain every relationship just because of history or obligation, you start to become more intentional about where your energy goes. You may realize that certain people only engage with you when they need something, or that certain dynamics always leave you feeling depleted. In the past, you may have tolerated this because you didn't want to seem cold or selfish. But now, you understand that protecting your energy isn't selfish. It's essential. Part of protecting your energy is learning to be okay with being misunderstood. Not everyone will understand why you've stepped back or changed. Some may take it personally, some may criticize you, some may create their own stories about your motives. This is one of the hardest parts of the process, resisting the urge to explain or defend yourself. You have to trust that the people who are meant to walk with you will not require you to shrink or justify your evolution. And in the quiet that follows these endings, you begin to discover something unexpected. Solitude is not the same as loneliness. When you are surrounded by people who don't truly see you, you can feel lonelier than when you are alone. But when you are alone and in alignment with yourself, the space becomes expansive rather than empty. You begin to enjoy your own company in a way that makes you less desperate for external connection. From that place, you connect with others out of choice, not out of need. And that makes every relationship. There's a strange kind of gratitude that comes when you look back on relationships that ended during your awakening. Even if they ended painfully, they taught you something about who you are and what you value. They showed you the parts of yourself that were willing to compromise too much, or the parts that were afraid to speak the truth. They gave you practice in letting go. And letting go is one of the core skills of living a conscious life. As you navigate this stage, you begin to see that relationships are not possessions to be kept, but living entities that grow, change, and sometimes dissolve. Just as you cannot force a flower to stay in bloom forever, you cannot force a relationship to remain in a form that no longer supports mutual growth. What you can do is tend to the soil of your own being so that, when new connections take root, they have the best chance to flourish. And when they do, you will find yourself surrounded by a different kind of tribe. One that doesn't just share your interests, but shares your commitment to truth. People who celebrate your growth rather than fear it. People who can sit with you in silence as comfortably as they can share laughter. People who see the world not just as it is, but as it could be. These are not people you have to chase. They meet you on the path, because they, too, are walking it. There comes a phase in every awakening where the noise of the world falls away. The familiar connections fade. The old distractions no longer tempt you, and you find yourself in a space you didn't expect. The void. It's not a place you can describe easily to someone who hasn't been there. It feels like standing in a vast, open expanse where all the landmarks of your old life have been erased. The people you once relied on aren't showing up in the same way. The goals you once chased don't excite you anymore. The routines that used to give your days structure now feel empty. You're left with a kind of stillness that is at once terrifying and sacred. In this space, loneliness often creeps in, and not the surface level loneliness of simply being without company. This is a deeper kind. The loneliness of realizing you no longer fit into the world as you knew it, yet you haven't fully stepped into the new one. It's like being between two shores with no boat, just trading water in the vast unknown. Your mind wants to label this as something gone wrong, because we're conditioned to believe that constant activity, constant connection, and constant forward motion are signs of a healthy life. But in truth, this void is not a sign of failure, it's a sign of transformation. When you're in it, though, it doesn't feel noble. It can feel like loss, like absence, like something essential has been stripped away. You wake up and wonder who you are without the people, walls, and identities that once defined you. You look at your phone and there are fewer messages. You walk into a room and feel like you're there physically, but not energetically. And because you've stripped away so many of the illusions and distractions, there's nowhere to hide from yourself. You are face to face with your own thoughts, your own fears, your own longings, without the usual noise to drown them out. This is why so many people resist this stage. It feels uncomfortable to sit with emptiness. The mind wants to fill the space with something familiar, even if that something is toxic. That's why in this stage, you might be tempted to reach out to old relationships you've outgrown or take on activities that no longer align with your growth, just to escape the quiet. But the void isn't here to punish you. It's here to strip away what is not real so that what is real can emerge. If you fill it too quickly with the old, you rob yourself of the chance to discover what's possible in the new. In spiritual terms, this is often called the death phase. Not a literal death, but the death of an old self. It's the dismantling of identities, beliefs, and attachments that no longer serve you. And just as in nature, death always precedes new life. Seeds don't sprout without first breaking open in the dark soil. Caterpillars don't fly without first dissolving into what seems like nothing inside the cocoon. This stage is your cocoon, and the loneliness you feel is not because you are unworthy of connection. It's because you are in the sacred process of becoming something you've never been before. This is where the inner work deepens. Without the constant stimulation of the outside world, you start to notice things you once overlooked. Subtle thoughts, buried emotions, patterns of self, talk that have shaped your life for years. You may notice how much of your identity was built around pleasing others or avoiding conflict. You may realize how many of your choices were made from fear rather than from desire. The void gives you the space to sit with these realizations, to question them, to release them. It's not easy, because it means taking radical responsibility for your inner world. There's no one left to blame, no one to distract you from yourself. Yet in this very space, you begin to build a deeper kind of relationship, the one you have with yourself. At first, it might feel awkward, like spending time with a stranger you're not sure you like. But as you learn to listen to yourself without judgment, you start to hear your true voice. Not the voice of conditioning or fear, but the voice that has been quietly speaking under the noise all along. You start to notice what actually brings you peace, what genuinely excites you, what drains you, and what nourishes you. This is the beginning of self-trust. Self-trust is a rare thing in a world that constantly tries to tell you who you should be. It grows slowly, like a plant that needs careful tending. Every time you listen to your intuition instead of ignoring it, you strengthen it. Every time you set a boundary instead of breaking it, you strengthen. Every time you choose rest over the pressure to perform, you strengthen it. And as this trust builds, the loneliness begins to change flavor. It shifts from a sharp ache to a kind of spacious solitude. A solitude that is full rather than empty. This is one of the great paradoxes of the awakening journey. You have to be willing to be alone before you can truly connect. When you depend on others to fill your inner emptiness, you build relationships out of need, and need breeds fear. Fear that they'll leave. Fear that they'll change. Fear that you'll lose your sense of self without them. But when you've walked through the void and found your own center, you approach relationships differently. You don't need someone to complete you. You invite them to walk beside you. In this space, you may also begin to see the difference between being alone and feeling lonely. Being alone is a physical state. Loneliness is an emotional one. You can be in a crowded room and still feel lonely if you're not truly seen. And you can be alone in nature or in your own home and feel deeply connected to life if you're aligned with yourself. This realization starts to shift the way you view connection altogether. You stop chasing it desperately and start cultivating it naturally. Yet the void is not just about personal introspection. It's also a place where you begin to sense a deeper connection to life itself. Without the noise of constant social interaction, you start to notice the quiet rhythms of the world around you. The way the light changes throughout the day, the sound of your own breath, the subtle pull of your own energy. You begin to feel connected not just to people, but to the very fabric of existence. There's a stillness that holds you, a presence that doesn't need words. Some call this God, some call it the universe, some call it consciousness. Whatever you call it, you begin to feel it more directly in this stage. Of course, the mind will still resist. It will try to convince you that something is wrong, that you need to hurry up and fix this phase, that you should be doing more, achieving more. But the void teaches you that your worth is not tied to your productivity or popularity. You begin to realize that you are valuable simply because you exist. This is perhaps the most radical and liberating truth you can discover. And it often only comes when the usual sources of external validation have fallen away, and something else happens in the quiet. Your capacity to listen expands, not just to your own inner voice, but to others, to the subtle cues of the world, to the whispers of inspiration that come when you're not distracted. This is why so many artists, visionaries, and spiritual teachers throughout history have sought solitude, because in the absence of noise, the deepest truths can finally be heard. As you start to embrace this space, you may find that the loneliness becomes a kind of companion rather than an enemy. It walks beside you, not as a reminder of what you've lost, but as a reminder of the space you've created for what's to come. It keeps you humble, keeps you present, keeps you aware of the preciousness of connection when it does arrive. And when new people and experiences begin to enter your life, you greet them not with desperation but with gratitude, knowing you are whole with or without them. The void also teaches patience in a world that worships instant gratification. It shows you that some seasons are meant for stillness, for incubation, for unseen growth. Just because you can't see the results yet doesn't mean nothing is happening. Roots grow in the dark before a tree ever breaks the surface. The same is true for you. And when you eventually look back on this stage, though you might not believe it now, you will see it as one of the most powerful and formative parts of your journey. It will be the time when you learn to be with yourself, when you stopped outsourcing your worth, when you began to hear the whispers of your own soul clearly for the first time. It will be the time that stripped away everything that wasn't truly you, so that when you stepped forward again, you did so as someone whole, grounded, and unshakably true. When you reach the point where the spiritual awakening has shaken you to your core, stripped away illusions, and brought you face to face with the truth of who you are, there is a temptation to retreat inward and stay there. You discover stillness, you feel peace, and you want to protect it at all costs. The noise of the world suddenly feels abrasive, like a place you no longer belong. You start to think maybe you can keep your awareness pure by staying away from it all, keeping your head in the clouds and your feet off the ground. But this is not integration. This is isolation dressed up as enlightenment, and it will rob you of the depth and richness that awakening is meant to bring. Integrates the process of taking that awareness you've cultivated in silence and weaving it into the living fabric of the everyday world. It's about merging the two dimensions of your existence, the inner and the outer, so that your life becomes a seamless expression of your truth. Too many people make the mistake of thinking the work is done when they've had their breakthrough. They believe the goal is to live in constant detachment as if staying uninvolved in life's messiness is a higher state. They meditate for hours, they distance themselves from friends and family, and they quietly judge the world as if it is sleep, and they are awake. But real awakening isn't a wall you build to separate yourself from the world. It's a bridge you build to connect your deepest insights with the realities around you. You don't transcend life by leaving it. You transcend life by fully participating in it while no longer being enslaved by it. This is why integration matters. Without it, your awareness becomes sterile, like a seed that never touches soil. Integration is where the raw power of your awakening starts to take shape in the tangible realm. It's where your inner clarity becomes outer action. Imagine someone who has spent years training their body in a hidden gym, but never steps onto the playing field. They might be strong, flexible, and skilled, but the purpose of training is to engage with the game, not avoid it. Your awakening is like that. It has prepared you to interact with the world in a new way, not to escape it. And when you begin to integrate, you realize that the world is not an obstacle to your peace. It's the very canvas where your peace can be expressed. This stage can be uncomfortable because it challenges the safety you've found in your inner sanctuary. You've learned how to be still, how to detach, how to see beyond the illusions, and now life asks you to step back into environments that trigger old patterns. It's tempting to think, if I go back into that chaos, I'll lose what I've gained. But you won't, if your awakening is real. In fact, the only way to strengthen it is to put it to the test. You can't truly know the depth of your stillness until you've walked into the noise and stayed calm. You can't measure the strength of your compassion until you've dealt with someone who challenges your patience. And you can't claim you've transcended fear until you've faced the situations that once terrified you. The paradox is that the peace you found in solitude is not meant to be kept in solitude. Peace becomes its most powerful when it's shared in environments that lack it. Light has meaning because it exists in contrast to darkness. Your awakened awareness will only reveal its full potential when it's embodied in real world situations. When you speak it, act it, and live it among people who might not understand it. This doesn't mean preaching or convincing anyone of your perspective. Integration is not about becoming a spiritual salesperson. It's about embodying your truth so fully that your presence itself becomes a reminder of what the mind will resist this step because isolation feels easier. It feels safer to remain in spaces where everyone thinks and feels like you, where your worldview is unchallenged. But this is where growth stops. Integration requires you to leave the comfort of your spiritual echo chamber and engage with life in all its messiness. You will meet people who trigger your ego, situations that stir your old fears, and moments where you forget everything you've learned. That's not a sign of failure. It's the training ground. Just as a muscle must be stressed to grow, your awakening must be tested in real-world friction to deepen. Think of integration like breathing. Your inward journey, meditation, reflection, detachment, is the inhale. It fills you with clarity and oxygen. But you can't just keep inhaling forever. You must exhale. You must release that inner clarity into action, into conversation, into choices that ripple into the lives of others. Without the exhale, the inhale becomes suffocating. Without the outer expression, the inner awareness stagnates. This rhythm of breathing, taking in wisdom and giving it out through living, is the natural flow of an integrated life. When you begin to live this way, something shifts. The world that once felt heavy and meaningless starts to feel like a playground for your soul, not because it's perfect. It never will be. But because you're no longer dependent on its conditions for your sense of peace. You can sit in a noisy cafe and feel as centered as you do on a meditation cushion. You can engage in a heated discussion without being dragged into emotional chaos. You can work in a challenging job and still carry the same calm you found in silence. This is when you realize that awakening is not about changing your environment to suit your peace. It's about carrying your peace into any environment. Some people avoid integration because they fear losing their sense of uniqueness. They secretly enjoy feeling different from the rest of the world, as if their awakening puts them in a separate category. But real awareness dissolves that separation. It doesn't make you above others. It makes you more connected to them. You see their struggles as subtles you've known. You see their illusions as stages you once went through. And instead of judgment, you feel compassion. This compassion doesn't make you passive. It inspires you to contribute, to help, to be a stabilizing presence for others without needing to control them. When integration becomes your path, your life stops being split into spiritual time and real life. There is no longer a gap between the person you are in meditation and the person you are at work, in relationships, or walking down the street. Everything becomes part of the same field of awareness. Washing the dishes becomes meditation. Sitting in traffic becomes a chance to observe your mind. A disagreement becomes an opportunity to practice presence and empathy. Life stops being a distraction from your spiritual path, because life becomes your spiritual path. This shift also redefines your sense of purpose. Purpose may have been tied to achievement, recognition, or personal fulfillment. After awakening, purpose becomes about alignment. It's less about what you do and more about the quality of consciousness you bring to what you do. You could be a teacher, a builder, a parent, or someone quietly doing behind the scenes work. None of it matters as much as the awareness you infuse into it. Every role becomes sacred when approached with presence. Every interaction becomes meaningful when met with authenticity. Integration doesn't mean you won't feel challenges, frustrations, or moments of doubt. It means you navigate them differently. You stop seeing them as threats to your peace and start seeing them as opportunities to deepen it. You don't suppress your emotions. You witness them. You don't avoid conflict. You approach it with clarity. You don't run from discomfort. You stand in it until it teaches you what it came to teach. This is how your awakening grows roots so deep that no storm can pull it out. And as you live in this integrated way, you realize that the goal was never to escape the human experience. It was to live it more fully, with eyes open and heart steady. You begin to appreciate the beauty in imperfection, the lessons in failure, the depth in ordinary moments. You stop needing life to be extraordinary to feel alive. You recognize that the same awareness you touched in moments of deep stillness is available to you while you're laughing with a friend, solving a party, or helping a stranger. You see that spirituality and everyday life are not separate lanes. They are the same road. You also discover that your impact on the world comes not from grand gestures, but from the energy you carry into each moment. A calm tone in a tense meeting, a patient response to someone's frustration, a genuine smile at a stranger. These are small acts on the surface, but they ripple outward in ways you'll never fully see. The integrated life isn't about constantly trying to change the world in some massive, visible way. It's about living in such alignment with your awareness that your presence itself becomes a quiet catalyst for change. When this becomes natural, you stop worrying about whether you're doing enough or being spiritual enough. You're no longer performing spirituality. You're living it. You can be fully in the world without being consumed by it, and fully within yourself without being cut off from others. The boundaries dissolve, and life becomes a single, flowing movement of awareness meeting experience, over and over again. And this is where the journey continues, where each step you take outward is matched by a deepening within, and each moment you live becomes both the practice and the expression of your awakening. When you come to this point in the journey, something profound begins to happen. The layers of effort you once carried, the mental weight of trying to maintain awakening, start to dissolve. What once felt like work, staying aware, watching your thoughts, practicing presence, now begins to feel natural, almost effortless. It's not that challenges disappear, it's that your relationship with them has shifted so much that they no longer define your state. There's a quiet confidence that you can meet whatever comes, because you have touched the part of yourself that is untouched by circumstances. This isn't arrogance, it's the deep trust that life is not happening against you, but through you and for you. In this stage, you begin to understand that all the earlier phases, seeking, awakening, integrating, were never about becoming someone new, but about uncovering what was always there. The illusions you shed weren't bad or wrong. They were simply mistaken identities you had to live through to see beyond. You start to hold your past with a kind of gentle gratitude, even the painful parts, because without them you wouldn't have been shaped into the person who can now see the world this way. The jagged edges of regret soften, the heaviness of guilt lightens, and you begin to understand that every step, no matter how messy, was part of the unfolding. And now, the focus shifts from doing to being. You stop obsessing over, what should I do with my life? And instead ask, how can I bring my full self into whatever life brings to me? You realize that purpose is not a destination to reach. It is a quality you bring into the moment. It's in the way you listen to someone without rushing to respond, the way you approach your work with care instead of obligation, the way you choose to be kind even when nobody will notice. Purpose stops being a grand mission written in the sky and starts being a quiet thread that weaves through everything you touch. This is where freedom begins to feel real. Not the kind of freedom you thought you wanted when you started. The freedom from problems, from responsibility, from discomfort. But the deeper freedom of knowing you can meet all of those without losing yourself. Freedom isn't about controlling the conditions of your life so that you're always comfortable. It's about being able to move through uncomfortable conditions without being trapped by them. It's about walking into uncertainty and still feeling anchored. With this freedom comes a lightness in how you move through the world. You no longer carry the urgency to fix everyone or solve everything. You see that everyone is on their own journey, just as you were, and that pushing them before they're ready doesn't help them grow. It just creates resistance. So you start to lead by example, not by force. You live your truth without demanding that others adopt it. And in doing so, you become a quiet invitation for those around you to explore their own depths. The sense of separation between you and others begins to dissolve more fully here. You see yourself in them, not just in the people you like, but also in those you once judged. Their fears remind you of your own. Their mistakes mirror the ones you've made. Their victories feel like yours because you recognize the same spark of life moving through all of you. This recognition changes the way you interact with people. Conversations become less about proving your point and more about understanding theirs. Relationships become less about getting your needs met and more about seeing how you can meet each other in truth. There's also a deeper intimacy with life itself. The small things you used to overlook now feel full of meaning. The sound of rain against a window, the smell of fresh bread, the feeling of sunlight on your skin, all of it becomes part of the same sacred tapestry. You don't need grand events to feel alive anymore. You don't need constant novelty or excitement. There's a richness in the ordinary because you're no longer half present in it. You're not thinking about the next thing or dwelling on the last thing. You're simply here, and that here-ness is enough. The fear of loss, which used to haunt you, also begins to lose its grip. You know now that everything in life is in motion, that nothing is permanent, and instead of that truth filling you with dread, it fills you with appreciation. You savor moments more fully because you know they won't last. You love people more deeply because you know you can't hold on to them forever. And strangely, this awareness of impermanence doesn't make life feel fragile. It makes it feel more alive. From this place, service begins to arise naturally. You don't have to push yourself to give back or make a difference. It just becomes the natural overflow of a full heart. You want to contribute to the world, not out of guilt or obligation, but out of joy. This service doesn't have to look like starting a foundation or writing a book. It might look like mentoring someone quietly, offering your skills where they're needed, or simply bringing your full attention to the people around you. You realize that the smallest gestures, done with presence, often have the most lasting impact. You also begin to trust the flow of life more deeply. There's less grasping for control, less fighting against what is. You still act, you still make decisions, you still shape your life, but you're no longer doing it from a place of fear or desperation. You're doing it from alignment. You've learned that there is a timing to things, that forcing them before their season leads to struggle, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is wait with openness. Patience stops feeling like passivity and starts feeling like wisdom. There's also a newfound courage in living authentically. In earlier stages, you might have hidden certain truths about yourself to fit in or avoid judgment. But now you understand that denying your truth is a far greater pain than any criticism you might receive for living it. So you speak more honestly, you make choices that reflect your values, and you stop apologizing for who you are. This courage isn't loud or aggressive. It's steady, rooted, and unshakable. And yet, even in this stage, there's no sense of arrival. You understand that awakening isn't a static state you achieve once and for all. It's a living, breathing journey that continues to unfold. You'll still face new challenges, new lessons, and new depths of understanding. The difference is that you now welcome them. You no longer see difficulty as something to escape, but as an invitation to grow even further. Each season of life becomes part of the same sacred path, each step bringing you into deeper relationship with yourself, others, and the mystery of existence. Through it all, there's a deep humility that settles in. You no longer feel the need to announce your spiritual growth or prove your wisdom. You understand that the most awakened people are often the ones who say the least about it. You don't carry the pressure to have all the answers. You're comfortable saying, "I don't know," and trusting that life will reveal what you need when you need it. This humility doesn't make you smaller, it makes you freer, because you no longer have to uphold an image of being perfect or always certain. And so you live, fully awake and fully human. You feel deeply, but you are not ruled by your feelings. You think clearly, but you are not trapped in your thoughts. You act with purpose, but you are not chained to outcomes. Life becomes a dance between the known and the unknown, the seen and the unseen, and you find beauty in the movement itself. You are no longer chasing some distant horizon where everything will be perfect. You are here, now, walking with awareness, and that is enough.